Well, welcome to another edition of Living a Good Life. I'm Brad Fain, and today I'm very excited to have a good friend of mine, Brad DeSaye, with me. Brad is the owner of J&G Sales in Prescott, Arizona. It's a family business as well. I'll let you give the history of that.
Sure.
But I thought today we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. We're going to mix it up because I believe, and it's near and dear to my heart, that the Second Amendment is a really big part of why living a good life exists in the United States and in America. So Brad, welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background about J&G and how you ended up in the business you're in, and let people know a little bit about what it is.
All right. Well, you know, it's a nice story. My parents got married in the mid-1940s, and my father got his first federal firearms license in 1946. So that's a long time ago.
What is a federal firearms license?
That's even in the 1930s, the U.S. government set up a licensing program that if you wanted to ship and receive firearms, you needed to have a federal firearms license, specifically with handguns originally. Then it became with everything in 1968. So yeah, my dad had a federal firearms license in 1946. So we've been at it a long time. That was in Montana. And my parents moved the family business here in 1977. And I bought my twin brother and I bought our parents out in 1994. And then I bought him out in 2007. So we've been at it a long time. Love the firearms business. It is something we really enjoy. The Second Amendment is very, very important to us. So we support it every chance we get, and love being in Prescott. So we've been here a long time also.
Great. And your twin brother, you would never recognize him if he was walking down the street next to you.
No. In fact, you played basketball with him.
I did. Brent and I played basketball together. You and I were Prescott Junior High together back when it was Prescott Junior High. We were just going over that.
Yep.
The Badgers.
Yep.
In red and white instead of blue and gold.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go a little bit about the Second Amendment. Let's get some history there. So the Bill of Rights was 1791.
Right.
I believe it was James Madison that proposed the Second Amendment.
You know, I'm not sure about that, but
might be. I'll have some fact checkers that'll get me.
For sure, they'll straighten us out.
So what's so important about the Second Amendment from your perspective?
You know, it does a great many things. The biggest thing, and the reason I think it's included as number 2 in the Bill of Rights, is it protects all the other rights. So we're still the freest country in the world. We were the freest country in the world when they established the United States. But, you know, you can have freedom of speech and freedom of religion, but government likes to creep in and start to control lives. Mm-hmm. So they just wrapped up the Revolutionary War, the founders of our country, the fathers of our country. So they felt it very, very important to be able to defend all the other rights that gave us our freedoms. So the Second Amendment was the Second Amendment for a reason. It defended the first, which is freedom of religion, freedom of public gathering, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. They realized without the Second Amendment, that could be trampled on and taken over, which there's been attempts over the centuries since we have it. But that's why it's so important. It's for self-protection, but as well protection from tyranny. So that's why it's number 2.
Protection from our government.
Yep.
And, you know, well-regulated militia, the people.
Right.
If they are able to defend themselves, then they can potentially have the ability to stop the federal government from imposing on our rights and our freedoms.
So the well-regulated militia at the time meant any able-bodied male at the time. That obviously means more now.
Yeah.
Any able-bodied male had the right to defend themselves and therefore the right to keep and bear arms. So I think it's been tried to be stretched other ways since then, but the Supreme Court has finally come down here in the last 15 years or so with some definitive rulings to state out it is an individual right. It's not a collective right, so which is really important.
So why don't you explain that? Why is it so important that it is an individual right over a collective right?
Well, the individual right, for example, freedom of speech. You have the right to say things that generally anything in the United States, provided it is not, doesn't cause panic, like yelling fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. Things like that. So you have the right that can't be taken care of. Although there is a big press today to silence a lot of people, especially if somebody doesn't agree with them or they find what they say hurtful. Well, that's part of the issue. So the collective right is it can be managed for the collective good of people. So somebody, typically in government, will determine what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to print, what you're allowed to do, or what you're allowed to own, or where you can possess a firearm. And that gets trampled on or trimmed down very easily, a collective right. An individual right, just what it means, each individual person has that right. So, it's much more important as an individual right than a collective right.
Great, thanks. So a lot's come over the years, the development of firearms, the improvement of the technology.
Right.
A lot of sports evolved out of this ability to own firearms.
Yep.
That are all worldwide. A lot of them are worldwide now. Hunting is a sport but skeet shooting and target shooting and the Olympic sport where they ski and they shoot. Biathlon.
Yep.
And that's always impressive to me, where you can get your heart rate up and then slow down and try to shoot. Right. And so tell me a little bit about the firearm technology. What do you think has been the best advancement in firearm technology? I don't know, maybe since you've been in the industry.
Since I've been in the industry.
If there's been any, like, what was a milestone that you would be like, this was a great...
That's a great question. So if you go back in history, of course, muzzle loaders, which means you have to pour the powder and put the bullet in from the muzzle.
Yeah.
Then you had to prime the pan, as they call it, another powder there, and use a flint to ignite it and set it off. So it's slow, cumbersome, susceptible to wind and rain, especially. I mean, it was a real deal. I mean, you didn't accidentally go out there and shoot several shots off. I mean, you had to be very intentional, and you had to protect your firearm, and it was a big deal. So the advancements that went from there is the self-contained cartridge. So when you had the primer, the ignition system, the powder, and then the case and the bullet, and suddenly you had something self-contained, protected from the elements, from the environment, and it was much faster to reload the firearm. And of course, that came out in the mid-1800s, became pretty common. So that was huge. That really was. So then they went from black powder, which is saltpeter and sulfur, and it's corrosive and erosive, and it's bad. You have to clean your gun all the time. The development of smokeless powder, pretty much late 1800s, early 1900s. That was a huge thing. Suddenly you have something much safer. Didn't stink. It didn't erode and corrode your guns as much, and it allowed for increased velocity and new cartridges. And there's a huge transformation that took place around 1900 around the world in the military and in civilians. Suddenly you had these cartridges with more range and self-contained, and a lot of advancements, and the firearm advancements followed that. So there was a lot more advanced firearms. I mean, semi-automatic came along at that time frame, and they went from there. Well, but I think the biggest thing in recent times, in firearms in particular, is the use of CNC machines, computer-controlled, the tolerances. Especially in the last 30 years, the tolerance in gun production and ammunition production, the quality has gone through the roof. And the variety and the quality now is unrivaled in history as far as the firearms and ammunition that go with it.
To me, when I'm listening to you tell that story of all the different advancements, safety is there.
Oh yeah.
Each iteration of advancement in technology, even though the bullets get faster, even though you can shoot at a further distance, but they were becoming safer and safer.
Absolutely.
I mean, the more accurate you are with a rifle or a handgun, the safer it is.
Yep, absolutely.
Even though it might have all these other benefits like velocity and different things. But I was listening to the radio the other day, and we're talking about the world wars. And, what was it? It was either the First or Second World War. Like 75 million people were killed.
Yeah.
And you just think of the technology they had then, and then you see a war today, and I mean, they're all the wars are bad.
Right.
And to see the death of innocent people is bad, but the accuracy of everything is they can be so precise at a military level, and that transfers down into the civilian side of it, where you and I enjoy firearms, and they're far safer. The safeties,
yes, sir.
It's a lot less accidents. They still do happen.
Yep.
They're sad, but they're far
rarer than they used to be. So the NRA, National Rifle Association, depending upon how you fall on each side of your view of the NRA, I'm a supporter. Obviously, I think they've done a lot of wonderful good out there. They were almost single-handedly responsible for hunter safety programs and firearm safety programs starting after World War II. The number of accidental injuries on hunting trips, in the home have plummeted over those decades. Now, with that safety as well, I mean, with advancement in manufacturing techniques, there's a lot more, secure firearms. So, for example, the famous 6-shooter, the Cowboy 6-shooter, Colt, won the gun that won the West, right? Great design, great cartridge. 6-shooter, well, actually it's a 5-shooter if you want to be safe, because the way it was designed, the firing pin rests on the primer of the cartridge. So if you drop it or if it falls out of your holster, it can go off. So people learned early on you carry 5 rounds that are not 6. So you're always sitting on an empty chamber, right? Just for pure safety, because you could be bent over and it could fall out of your holster and hit the ground and go off, and who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah.
So they're still produced today. It's a design that's 150 years old, and they're still in production by both Colt and they still build them in Europe too for collector and eye appeal. So that is something that you have to be aware of. Now, Ruger came out in the 50s with an incredibly safe, big improvement design on the single action revolvers. So you can suddenly carry 6 rounds because the firing pin doesn't rest on the cartridge case or the primer anymore. So there's been huge advancements in safety and materials. I mean, going from all steel to like the Glock was the first plastic firearm, which is not, but it is. And it stood the whole self-defense handgun market on its ear in 1987, 86 when it came out. And so today, to find an all-steel self-defense handgun is not that common. So there's big changes.
Let's talk on a couple sensitive topics.
Okay.
So you mentioned the Glock, and one of the thoughts that comes to my mind when I hear the Glock is capacity. The Glocks, can some of them carry 17 rounds?
Yeah, or more.
So where do you sit with that versus, you hear a lot in the news about these high capacity, so many rounds, and I know that sometimes they're talking about the clips on rifles, but kind of enlighten us a little bit on that capacity debate and what's really at root with that debate, and is capacity really that much more dangerous than a 6-shooter? Just because you have 17 rounds versus 6, and this whole argument on...
That's a deep subject.
It is.
Misuse of a firearm, intentional misuse of a firearm it's in our human nature, unfortunately. There's, whether in Australia where they outlawed most firearms 20 plus years ago now, yes, their firearm accident rate, murder rate went through the floor, but their blunt weapon and knife murder rate went through the roof. People are still finding ways to hurt each other and kill each other just like they have through history. So, there's often a mental health debate that needs to be addressed out there that would really change you remember going postal?
Yes.
You remember that?
The phrase?
I think that the couple younger people here may not know what that means, but some postal workers back in the 80s and 90s started exhibiting issues and problems and came to the post office with firearms and shot coworkers. And there was several of those cases back in the day. And the post office launched a mental health where they had support available, and they made a huge difference. There hasn't been a postal shooting in decades, and it had become a serious thing. So that's a model people don't talk about, where if there's ready support out there for people that are having mental health issues, it can really make a difference in the misuse of a firearm, or intentional misuse of a firearm. So, that is another topic. But back to what your original question was about capacity on magazines. So, there's been a significant change over the last 75 years as far as how many rounds a handgun will hold or a rifle will hold. It's a lot more now in most states than 50 years ago. That allows, those additional rounds allow a person to defend themselves, and allows a police officer to defend themselves. Restrictions.
So that's the good side of it.
That's the great side of it.
That's the positive side of it.
The downside is it makes gun makers a target. Why do you need that many rounds? Well, there is a need for self-defense. So do you know that the 2 rounds or 4 rounds or 7 rounds or whatever the limit you want to impose on it will be enough to defend you and your family and your property? Can somebody say, well, you don't need more than that? Well, what if you do? What if you need 1 more than that? What if you need 5 more than that? So 17 on a Glock, I think, is an appropriate, solid number.
That becomes that debate that nobody can really answer. The question is, how many do you need to defend yourself? For some people, it might be 1, and other people,
none.
After 17, they might need one more.
Right, exactly. You never know.
And so you can't really answer that question of how many is enough. I guess where I would go with that is what makes you feel comfortable.
Right.
It's your own well-being, and part of that is what you're comfortable with.
Absolutely. So something we have said, and I'm going to hopefully repeat this more than once while we're here, you have the right to own a firearm and carry it for self-defense. But you also have, in my opinion, and my company's opinion, you have the obligation to learn to use it safely.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there's a lot of options out there for people. I mean, you can start with a YouTube video that handles proper technique and proper handling of a firearm if you don't have access to a gun range or professional instruction. But you do have the right, regardless, period. You can't infringe on that. And you can't make it a requirement that somebody has to learn how to use it. But you, from my opinion, you have the obligation to learn how to use it properly.
So I'm a young first-time gun buyer. Okay. I walk into your shop. I want to buy a gun. Mm-hmm. Where do you point me? How do you get me to be a responsible gun owner that's safe? What would you be saying to somebody like that walks into your store today? So
somebody walked in and hadn't owned a firearm before.
Yep.
Okay. Typically, you engage in conversation. Well, what would you like to use the firearm for? I mean, do you want to go plinking? Do you want to use it for self-defense? There's a myriad of choices. You want to use it for hunting, for competition. There's live and well in the United States, handgun and rifle and 3-gun competition, shotgun competition all over the country. Mm-hmm. Prescott has a pretty good sized gun range, a couple of them actually, that they do a lot of competitive shooting at. People really recreate and enjoy it. And then of course, with the National Forest all around us, there's a lot of places to go out and recreate with friends and family. Mm-hmm. So generally you try to establish what this person wants it for. If they say, well, I want to do both. I want to be able to go with my buddies and shoot a little bit, and I want to use it for self-defense. Well, great. We do have lists of instructors in the area, and Gun Sight's one, and Insight here in Prescott Valley, and then there's the Prescott Gun Range in Prescott, among others that run classes, and where you can learn proper and safe handling. I think the vast majority of people that haven't had a firearm before, if they have a friend or an acquaintance, they end up going out with that friend and acquaintance, which is decent if that friend and acquaintance has proper handling skills, and you can pick up on it. But there's also brochures that we give, and they go over the proper handling of the firearm before they leave the store with it. So there's some options out there, but it takes some dedication as the new gun buyer to actually follow through and find the training, find the competition that might help you, become more proficient with your firearm.
Well, it's no different than driving a car. You want to have a car to go places, you need to learn how to drive it. Somebody's got to teach you. There's classes and there's friends.
Yep, for sure.
And there's different levels of safety with cars and proficient drivers, and guns are no different. But the average profile of a first-time gun owner in your shop, are they coming in for self-defense because something spooked them, or are they coming in to plink? I doubt they're coming in for hunting or competition yet as a first-time home buyer or gun buyer.
So all of those things, I would say the number one is self-defense.
Self-defense.
So back when COVID started, who would have thought that COVID would have driven our industries so strongly? It was amazing how that first weekend in March of 2020, when COVID hit and the shutdowns were starting, the number of people that reached out to buy firearms, ammunition. And there was quite a number of first-time buyers. Our business, we have a retail over-counter business, but we also ship quite a bit around the country to other dealers who then do the retail delivery, but the customer can buy from us and have it shipped to another FFL holder, Federal Firearms License holder. So when the riot started in May, so in March, COVID, lockdowns, a lot of unhappy people, and understandably so. It was a miserable time in this country's history. And then the riot started. So when the riot started, we noticed a huge increase in business and a huge increase in first-time buyers, and almost every one of them was coming in for self-defense. Almost everyone. So a great many of them had never owned a firearm before. A good number hadn't fired a firearm before, but they wanted something for self-defense because you watch the news and you can see what had been happening. And so our sales guys really took it upon themselves to try to help people, point them in the right direction, make sure they understand how their firearm worked when they left and thoroughly, how to, the the basic tenets of firearm safety. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Be sure of your target was beyond. Don't point your muzzle at anything you're not willing to destroy. The basic serious tenets. If you follow any one of those, you'll never have an accident. Any one of those things with modern firearms, with the safety features they have. So that we try to instill that in all of our first-time customers, but any customer really. Just be reminded of it's a big thing.
One thing you said in that long explanation that I want to make sure our listeners understand is I cannot mail a firearm to somebody. So I want to buy somebody a gift and they live in another state. I'm going to buy it here from your shop and take it home, wrap it up. I can't mail it to them because you said you ship it from one dealer to another that has the license. Right. So I want to make sure everybody understands that firearms are unique and there legally, are laws around how we can
there are so many
mail
laws.
It.
There are so many laws. So actually, technically, if you already had a firearm at home, you've owned for years, let's say, and you want to give it to a friend of yours, okay, and lives in another state, they would have to have a dealer that they go complete the paperwork for, and then legally, you can mail it directly to that dealer if you have a copy of their license. That said,
but I have to mail it to the dealer.
Yes, and then they have to go and do the background check, and a handgun in particular. They have to go and do all the background check and everything at that dealer. That's the way the system is in the United States right now. If you wanted to buy a gun for a friend in another state from us, great. You come in, you can pay for it, and this is for my friend, and it's he's the one that's the owner of it, going to be the owner of it. And same thing, we'll ship it to the dealer.
But you're shipping it, or I'm shipping it to another dealer.
Right.
Now, driving a firearm across state line.
Legal for most of them.
Legal for most states. Some states are slightly different.
California is some draconian laws. But generally, if it's unloaded and locked, you can drive through any state in the country legally. Okay. Realistically, some of these states, if they pull you over and find a locked gun, unloaded gun, they may make your life difficult. Generally, in the western U.S., your coastal states, Oregon, California, Washington, there can be pretty difficult.
So there's that government coming in on some of our infringements here.
But there's been some recent court cases that, Supreme Court cases in particular, that have firmly established that you have the right to defend yourself. So we're going to, I think, see a lot of those laws get challenged and revised, I guess is the best way to put it. So they're in a process right now. But, that's the thing about the United States. The concealed carry concealed carry permits have been established as constitutional right now by the Supreme Court. So,
are we the best armed country, our citizens?
Yes.
In the world?
Yes.
Nobody even close to us.
No.
And it's because of the Second Amendment.
Right.
Is that the nexus of that? That right we have there.
Right. And our freedoms. I think the fact that we have freedoms, people, exercise their rights. If you exercise your rights, you get to keep them. Freedom of speech. Even if somebody stands on a soapbox and starts screaming something you don't agree with, I try to be pragmatic and say, you know what? I don't agree with what they're saying, but it's their right.
Yeah.
By the same token, if I choose to defend myself and carry a firearm regularly for self-defense, that's my right, and I'll do it. Now, if I pull it and wave it in a crowd and fire a random shot off, that violates all kinds of laws. I have to pay the penalty for that. So being aware of safe and proper handling.
You support that. You support that penalty.
Oh, absolutely.
That should not be allowed.
Absolutely.
I think it's important that people know that most people that are adamant about the Second Amendment are also adamant about those laws that are like, you can't be reckless with it.
Right. No. I mean, you can't brandish, you can't intimidate with it. It's self-defense. Yeah. So that's a key thing. In fact, shouldn't chuckle. There was a guy I just saw, he just was found guilty of brandishing and various other things, road rage. He was mad somebody pulled into his parking spot. So he got out, threatened the guy with a gun, held it up, pointed it at people around the parking lot, and he just got convicted of several felonies. And he's going to be sentenced here in December, I think, and he'll probably go to prison for several years. And based on what I read about it, that's probably appropriate for his behavior there. If you just choose to carry a firearm for self-defense, you have an obligation to use it safely and legally.
So let's talk about guns.
Intimidate. Okay.
Let's talk about guns, because this is the fun part about it.
Okay.
Most interesting gun you shot, just for whatever reason.
Boy, there's been a variety. I mean, it's like, what's your favorite children? Or favorite child of all your children? There was one that I came into unexpectedly. It was a 600 Nitro Express, which is old school, 19 teens cartridge in a modern single shot rifle. And boy, I wanted to shoot that. It was a big one, and I was kind of worried about it. And I go to the shooting range, and yeah, it turned you halfway around when you shot it.
One and done. You shoot that. You don't shoot that multiple times.
Oh yeah, no. And luckily there was a couple other people there that, here, your turn. That one was very memorable. Of course, anytime you shoot a 50 BMG, the famous Ma-Deuce cartridge from the belt-fed machine gun, but it's become very popular as either bolt action or semi-automatic firearm. Giant cartridge, long range, 2,000 plus yards, well over a mile.
Wow.
And that's an experience. Now, me personally, I don't care for recoil. I'm a recoil pansy. If something kicks me very hard, I don't want to shoot it in a handgun or a rifle. But you have to experience that at least once or twice.
Yeah.
But there's been some, shotguns and other things.
What would you say is the most accurate, let's say, hunting rifle or target rifle?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I refuse to wade into that debate. I will tell you.
What's your favorite, say, rifle to shoot out to 1,000 yards?
Okay. Once again, there's several.
But it's your favorite.
But like I said, I'm not a fan of recoil. I don't like getting beat up. So probably my favorite, if I have somebody coming out, and we're going to shoot out to 1,000 yards, I have a 6.5 PRC, which is a modern, very new cartridge in 6.5. It's like a short magnum, and a heavy rifle that most people can shoot all day long because the rifle's heavy enough it mitigates recoil. The other one I have is a 300 Win mag and a very heavy rifle you put a sound suppressor on it, and anybody can shoot it. I've had a lot of people that have never shot a rifle before make hits at 1,000 yards with it. So, it's a very accurate rifle, but at the same time, it's forgiving and it doesn't hurt when it goes off like some do. So yeah, there's a lot of great choices. Of course, I love handguns. I mean, that's one of my passions is all hunting handguns, self-defense handguns, target shooting handguns, all of them. I enjoy them a lot.
What's like a collector handgun that you're proud of?
As far as collector handgun go, the Militaria, the military firearms of the last 150 years, the modern military firearms. So, 1911s, the famous serving 100 years in the U.S. military, 45. Nice military version of that is very nice. Even the German guns, the Japanese guns, the British guns, they all have so much character and you wish they could talk. The ones that have actually were built in the 30s and clearly were in World War II. And then today, how they ended up in the United States, you're not sure. But, those are the ones that you really enjoy. There's so much variance. There were so many, during times of war, there were so many different arsenals usually cranking out firearms. Especially in foreign countries. There's a lot of different markings and such, and it leads you to a sense of wonder and trying to track down where did this actually come from, and there's a unit marking on it. So you look up where the unit was, and they were stationed here or based here. So that is very intriguing to me. The collector side of firearms. It's I have a lot of using firearms, but I have a lot more collector firearms, just ones that tell a story or are unique or whatever, what have you. So
now, Is that a service you offer through J&G for people who are interested in collecting, or is J&G pretty much just more modern weapons?
No,
not so much on the collection.
Historically we've done a lot of surplus firearms, but we do a lot of new ones presently. That seems to be where demand is, and there's a lot fewer of the collector surplus types around now. But typically we get the one-of-a-kinds in. We have a very experienced, my retired general manager actually. He retired about 15 years ago, and that lasted about 2 weeks. So he still comes in 30 to 40 hours a week. But he is so meticulous in his research that if you buy a collector type firearm from us, typically he has a very lengthy write-up on it. And you'd have to request that to get it from us. But it reads like a book, a paragraph or two about this particular firearm, which is pretty cool, pretty impressive. So we do offer that for most of our in-house guns that we have that are what we consider collector type. So, yeah.
Favorite handgun? I'm not going to say that.
I'm going to lay out a couple. All right. So I tell you, the Glock 26-27 series, the compact Glocks, they're great for self-defense. Rule number one of a gunfight, have a gun. It doesn't do you any good to have foul language and a napkin. Okay, so that's rule number one. So if you decide you're going to make the commitment to carry a firearm for self-defense outside the home, be proficient with it, be comfortable with it, so you know the ins and outs. And that means you have to, at least once a month, preferably once a week, familiarize yourself with it once again. Load it, unload it in a safe place, and make sure you know what you're handling, what you're doing. That's rule number one. So self-defense, I love those Glocks, but the SIG P365s, the competitor from Sig Sauer now, if I was starting over today, I would be likely carrying one of those. So there's a couple of great choices there. So one's kind of like the old faithful, and one's kind of like, it's kind of a shiny, pretty one. As far as hunting goes, I love the bolt action handguns, the kind of hand rifles, the bolt action actions with short barrels and a pistol grip. Those are intriguing to me, and not just for hunting, but for target shooting. When you can get a handgun and you can shoot it 500, 600, 700 yards, it's and make hits on targets, it's quite a feeling of accomplishment. So I have a Savage Striker that's my personal favorite.
So what's your rule of thumb for somebody who wants to become proficient? Is there like, you better go out and shoot this thing 500 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and then you're starting to get into the proficiency? I mean, what should somebody expect if they want to go down this journey?
Right. I have to be honest with you. If you have proper technique, there's a video or a training seminar you've been to where you've learned proper handling and manipulation of your firearm, and you do it over and over. Doing it statically or doing it non-live is very valuable, more valuable than a live fire often, because you can really focus on what's important: your grip, your sight picture, your trigger control. Very, very important. So yes, it's important that you fire your gun enough to know you can hit something with it, A, and B, it's going to function properly, which modern guns, it's almost unheard of to have them not function properly, but it's still possible.
Yeah.
But that static practicing, when I say once a week or once a month, I don't mean running out the range and burning up 100 rounds. That'd be great if you can.
So dry firing in
a safe condition. So if you clear your firearm, you know it's empty, you have a safe backstop, and you can come up and practice sight picture, trigger control, manipulation, how the empty magazine goes in and out, and you are familiar with it. So if you ever need it, 2 a.m., your door gets kicked open, are you thinking, oh my gosh, how does this gun work? That doesn't work so well. You need to me, if you're going to use it for defense, you're going to need to be proficient enough that in high stress situations, you know what to do. You know how your gun is kept, how you maintain it, and you know how to make it work.
So same rules would apply. I have my gun. It's empty. I know it's empty. There's no ammo in it. I want to practice self-defense techniques.
Sure.
I would still want to make sure I know where I'm pointing it. I don't put my finger on the trigger
until you're on the target.
Until I'm on a target. I don't point it anywhere I'm not intending to pull the trigger.
Yes.
Even though I know it's empty and all that, all those rules still always apply
always.
when you have a handgun in your hand.
Or any firearm, yeah.
Any firearm.
Yep.
And so then if I'm into self-defense, that's what my purpose is, practice in my house.
Yep.
But just make sure nobody's around and I'm not pointing the firearm around people in any direction I want, even though I know it's empty.
Right.
That's exactly. Usually where those tragic stories come from, is I thought it was empty and lo and behold.
Yep.
So
I think people as a whole have gotten much safer over the years. I mean, they've heard the stories. So if you don't ever point it, well, here's my analogy I use for a lot of new shooters. First time, everybody's seen Star Wars. They know what a lightsaber is. So if you treat the muzzle of a firearm like a lightsaber, but it has a 1,000-foot blade on it. So anything you go like this on, you've just destroyed. And if you always remember that, keep it pointed in a safe direction, you'll always be okay. So, but if you cover it with that muzzle, you could have destroyed it.
So modern weapons you can dry fire. Is there any weapon that you can't dry fire? Because I used to always, for whatever reason, I had it in my head like dry firing was bad, but I'm hearing you say no, it's clearly not.
Well, a lot of the surplus guns, the World War II era and before 1950s, tolerances weren't as good. So on rimfires in particular, which is 22 long rifle, 22 Magnum, sometimes a firing pin would impact the edge of the chamber and it could blunt them both. Usually that's not an issue anymore.
Okay.
Rimfires, you can dry fire possibly. Most center fires, you're just fine. Some of the guns from the 60s and before had cast firing pins. If you dry fired them, you could break a firing pin. The modern guns, dry fire all you want, generally speaking. And in fact, most of them will say in the manual, it's safe to do so.
And you're a fan of dry firing as a way to
Absolutely.
remain proficient. So you don't have to run
Absolutely.
out to the shooting range. You don't have to buy thousands and thousands of rounds of ammo.
Well, I would like that. Please come by and buy ammo. But no,
Well, you need that for reserves, right? Just
right.
make sure.
But no, dry practice is huge, and I think it's a big part. And I don't know how many times we've had somebody who's bought a firearm, went to a class, learned how to use it, and then they come into us wrapped up in a towel 3 years later and say, "I haven't touched my gun in 3 years. I don't remember." And you're like, "Okay, let's step over here and let's try and clear this firearm." That happens actually a lot, and which is unfortunate. If you make the commitment to a firearm, you should try to put a reminder in your phone once a week or once a month. And as long as you pull up the video, pull out your paperwork, okay, here's how this works, you stay at least proficient with it.
Good.
Yeah.
So J&G Sales
Yep.
in Prescott.
Yes, sir.
Been there since
1977.
1977. Family-run business.
Yes. That's what, 46 years we've been in Prescott now.
Yeah.
Long time.
Seen some changes.
Oh, just a little.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming out, talking about
Thank
the
you, Brad.
Second Amendment, talking about firearms and gun safety and all that. It all goes together.
Yep.
All of that, Second Amendment, firearms and safety
Yes. I
all go
agree.
together, and you can't have one without the other.
I agree.
So keep supporting our Second Amendment,
Always.
and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Living a Good Life. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today. We'll see you next time.